So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first Brown Bag seminar here at University of Hagen. The topic of today's seminar is relevance in information systems research, and it's my great pleasure to have a very special guest for opening this Brown Bag seminar series. He is the author of more than 25 edited books. His works have appeared in peer-reviewed journals. He's worked in larger projects with companies such as Maersk, IBM, and SAP, and he is a great friend and has also always been a mentor of me. It's a pleasure to have you here today, Niels Bjørn-Andersen, professor at Copenhagen Business School. Niels, we are very much looking forward to your talk, and the floor is yours.
All right. Good morning, and thank you for having me here today, and especially to Till for organizing this here. The topic of my talk is relevance of information system research. It's been on my mind since the break of dawn, or at least the last 50 years. And it's a topic which has been on my mind since I started doing research. But just a bit about myself, as Till was mentioning, I've written a lot. I've done all my duties. I produced a lot of articles in peer-reviewed journals, but I'm mostly proud of the fact that I have had more than 500 master's students, 35 PhD students. I taught at all levels. I've collaborated with big companies, and I believe I made a difference. And I think that's the important part. I also been knighted by the Queen, which of course was very nice. But the sad fact that I'm going to talk about today is that, in my opinion, half of IS academic research time is wasted. It's wasted on writing peer-reviewed papers for scientific journals that nobody cares to read. And if you think about it, this is terrible. Here we have more or less the best and the brightest, and they're wasting half of their time doing academic exercises, which are really an exercise in futility, as I will argue. And let's dig into that argument. The publishing costs are quite substantial. There was done of the 12.4 million peer-reviewed articles globally a year. And the cost of that is typically, I was in Australia, they said about 200,000 Australian dollars, about 100,000 euros. And this was almost exactly the same amount as we have in CBS, taking all our academic costs of writing papers and divided by the about 500 papers we have. In long-range planning few years back, they even said that a top level journal would cost about $500,000. But if it was actionable, if it was something that actually was used and could be broadly distributed, it was $1.4 million. So it's a lot of money we're talking about. And therefore, I suggest that while yesterday we were measuring the number of articles, today we are obsessed with the citations, H-index, etc. But tomorrow, I think we should somehow measure societal value. So my agenda, as I'll argue here, is it's a global problem that most of the efforts we have, or a lot of the efforts we have, goes into what is internal to academic, the number of peer-reviewed journal articles and citations. But to increase the value, we really have to have some external measures. How relevant is it? And how can we incentivize our academics to do something which is useful? And I developed such a tool, and I'll come back to that in about 20 minutes. Let me point out 12 challenges that I see in counting publication. First of all, I believe a lot of my colleagues, a lot of PhD students, are not primarily focused on new knowledge. They're concerned with publishing papers in the best journals. This will encourage dysfunctional behavior. Publish as long as it is possible, no matter the cost. We publish almost the same, if we can get away with it, in many different places: conferences, third-rate journals, then first-rate journals. The more the merrier. And out of the 12.4 million journal articles, this is a figure from 2016, but I'm sure it's higher today, only 27% in science were cited, 32% in social science, including the IS, of course, and 82% in human science was never cited. Never cited. In mathematics, the average number of readers is 1.5. The highest number of publications, I looked it up in Scopus. It turned out there was actually one researcher who had his name associated, his name on 7,000 papers. If you calculate that, it's about one per hour all year round, including when he's asleep. I mean, that's ridiculous. Many researchers are schizophrenic in the sense they say, well, this is what I do for my academic reputation, and this is what I do for society, because I think it's useful for the Volkswagen company or for SAP, whatever. But why can we not try and combine that? Citation counts get wrecked because obviously, since it is so important to get number of publication count up, you citation up, then there's a lot of ways of fiddling the system. I cite you, you cite me, mutual admiration clubs, etc. And even worse, modern AI is now used extensively, machine learning, big data, to analyze what is a typical way of writing in MISQ or in ISR or whatever. And then you can develop a template, and then that template can sort of be filled in with data. And especially if you're doing something like scraping a lot of Facebook data or and then Twitter or whatever, then you can get 1 million instances and you do some very, very nice statistics. And of course, writing the methodology part and writing the other parts of the article, like literature review and all that, that's something which there's a best way of doing it. And that's, of course, the one we repeat. So in that way, we are getting closer to automating the task of the key point today that most academics perceive, namely that of writing new articles. There's many examples of especially Far Eastern researchers who are paying $10,000 to have your paper, get a paper into a journal. And as Wall Street Journal was writing a few years back, they said universities were playing the ranking game. And they said that Chinese universities are leading the pack. They hire hundreds of postdocs, and all they do is to churn out articles in order to lift the university ranking. And so we've seen the top Chinese universities, the top 5 especially, they jump so like 50 places in the world ranking. And there what we have found is that these institutions are ceasing to be real universities, but they become paper writing factories. I mean, paper writing factories. This is sad. I think it's true also for IS in Germany. I picked a picture here of Scheer. If we go back 20, 30 years, there was a strong collaboration between IS research and German industry, especially Scheer and his software company had a huge impact on the way the architecture of the software package of SAP. But what has happened over the last 30 years is that Germany has, as everybody else in the Western world, has adopted the US model, published as much as possible. And German research, IS researchers are now dominating the field in Europe. So at an European Conference Information System, it's not unusual that half of all papers submitted would have at least one German author. I mean, you learned it, you found out, but unfortunately, I think it's taking you the wrong way. Is it really relevant to industry? I doubt it. I'll have 3 cases on this. It is difficult to publish societal relevant research in our top journals. Some of my own research, we address the challenge of inefficiency in international maritime transport, container transport. What we found was that when you're looking at transporting a container from Xi'an in China to, say, Leeds in UK, 72% of all costs are administration. Only 28% are operational costs like bunker, oil, ship, crew, etc. So Ban Ki-moon in 2014 was saying at the World Economic Forum in Davos, he said, this accounts to somewhere between 300 and 500 billion euros. This is much more than the GDP of Denmark, just wasted on administration. Why don't we do something about that? So we started doing something about that. We started an avocado transport from the plantation in Kenya to the market in Rotterdam. It involved 40 actors, 40 companies, and over 80 documents. And most data on these were copied from one document to the next. And of course, that makes errors, and you can include paper notes between these. This is not efficient. So we wrote a paper on that, addressing the issue with proposal for improvement. I wouldn't say we solved it, but we did a pretty good job, I think. So we wrote this scientific article. We submitted it to JMIS, and it came back from Vladimir Svas, the editor-in-chief of JMIS, which has been for 40 years. And he said rejected it because, as he said, it was only relevant to practice. And I mean, I could bang my head on the wall. If we are addressing a problem which is relevant to practice, why can't he publish it? And the reason he can't, it was not a theory, but that was because we hadn't framed our suggestions as a theory. That is, a theory, which of course was not confirmed, but it was a hypothesis. This is ridiculous. It had a huge practical impact. We presented the results to the chairman of the board of Maersk, Kim Hagemann-Snabe, former CEO of SAP. Now he's the chairman of the board in Siemens and the chairman of the board in Maersk Container. And he agreed. He said, you're dead right on the analysis. What can we do about it? And we discussed it. And to some extent, our results have now led to the initiative, which is called Trade Lens, which is a website. It's a network market, where you are standardizing all of this so that you can avoid a lot of the manual transactions. We're using blockchain, digital platform for this standardized communication, and it's going really well.
And just to clarify, with these manual transactions and the paper notes in between the documents, you are referring to potential bribes, right? Money that could be
corruption
between the documents. Yes.
Of course, yes. I mean, it's well known that in certain harbors you need to find $5,000 somehow, and to even to get a chance to offload and so on. You got like cargo or to load, but actually there's a lot of bribery going on, even in Western Europe, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. Another type of paper that almost was published, I was associate editor for MISQ. I handed the paper, which was a study of intention to buy. You know this concept from TAM, one of the most well-known established piece of research, where we basically ask people, will this increase your intention to buy something? The researchers, two professors, had done really nice methodology, very well written, no mistakes, large survey, 1,200 respondents, excellent advanced statistics. It was actually very neat. What they studied was a Mercedes shop in Second Life. You probably don't remember Second Life anymore, but this was a virtual world where you could buy land and you could build your house, and you could also do a Mercedes shop, which they did. So they want to know, did this Mercedes shop have any effect on sales? So in some sense, it sounds relevant, right? Well, the shop increased intention to buy. Is that interesting, relevant? I think it is. However, The study was done back in 3, and here we are getting the paper in 10. Respondents were students of the professors. So these were students commanded or kindly asked, but couldn't refuse, asked about their interest to buy a Mercedes car before they've seen the shop and after they've seen it. I mean, what is the validity of this? And why should we publish this? The 2 reviewers I had, or 3 reviewers actually, said, oh, let's publish this. I put my foot down with the editor-in-chief and said, I'm not going to publish this because there's 0 value. And there's a huge, I mean, how many students can honestly say their intention to buy is increased? And I mean, how many students buy a Mercedes? Come on. So it was rejected. The third case I mentioned is a positive case. It's a series 3, actually 3 projects we've had. 10-year funded EU initiative, close to 80 million euros, so a lot of money, 70 partners, a lot of industry partners. And the goal was to increase effectiveness, safety, and reduce climate impact in the maritime sector. And the results were higher transparency in collaboration because we helped them develop a language and a website and basically increase transparency. 10% improvement in turnaround time in a harbor, in a port. And we developed a new international standard, which the IMO, International Maritime Organization, has adopted, the S211. Of course, we wrote a few scientific articles, but we developed what we call concept notes, 10, 15 pages, with up to 50 co-authors. So on the 30 concept notes, there was about 50 different authors for credibility, collaboration with bureaus, and actually talking the practice language. A typical download of one of these concept notes was 5,000 times. So we put out a new one, and 2 days later, I could see that 37 people, individuals, different individuals in Maersk had downloaded that concept note. Had they read it? Had they understood it? I mean, I cannot be sure, but there's a high probability. If they come back week after week, or every 2 weeks it was, you actually get a huge impact. And in total, we reached about 2 million recipients. So I believe it is actually possible to do relevant research which get very wide dissemination, and in that way help create a better world. There's been critique of what, especially business school research, not IS in particular, this one here, but the Bennis and O'Toole paper, How Business School Lost Their Way, is basically an argument back from May 2005, Harvard Business Review. And they're saying that we're becoming too scientific because we're presenting articles nobody can read, and we don't concern ourselves with what's really necessary and important in society. Or 2 IS researchers, John Eckhart and James Weatherby, who is referring to the first article and again saying, how can we make, in this case, business school and information systems more relevant to students and industry? Or in 2018, Shapiro and Kirkman said, now it's time to make it more relevant. So it is written about it, but not much happened. There was a McKinsey study, and you'll understand why it's not published. It's an internal study. It was done pro bono, that is for Erasmus University by McKinsey. You're obviously aware that Erasmus is a very famous university and also very high class business school. They had sort of 2 institutions inside. And at that time, about 10 years ago, the drive was to centralize more, to have fewer institutes, departments. So they had a management center which was hugely successful. Lots of people of industry, lots of students, lots of industry recognition. But they also had a department of economics. And as you know, business schools for a long time, if you go back to the 50s, were criticized for not being scientific enough. So there was two reports back in the mid-50s by Rockefeller Foundation and Ford Foundation that argued that business schools should become more scientific. And indeed we've been. Business school would have, and that was what Erasmus had, their department of economics. And this department of economics had few students because nobody chose it, but they also had a large number of academic publications, was ranked very highly in Europe. So the idea was, why don't we merge the two? Because then the management center can learn something about publishing and the economics can learn something about how to do something which students would appreciate. But after 5 years, the total number of publications had gone up, increased significantly. The people at the management center were now forced, nudged to write more scientific articles, so that was good. However, McKinsey also found that the new integrated department had become inconsequential to industry. Inconsequential to industry. Basic industry doesn't care because it's not relevant.
That's usually not the result you expect from a pro bono work, I guess.
No, but it's interesting that McKinsey is coming out with it. And of course, McKinsey is worried because where should they get the good students that they can send out as consultants?
Yeah.
There was an ACSB. ACSB is the Association of Advanced Collegiate Schools of Business. That came out in 2008. And they said that these schools, that includes the Erasmus and Copenhagen Business School and others, should include impact of faculty on audiences. So how do professors impact students and industry? We should create incentives for greater diversity. We should examine the linkages to practitioners, develop awards programs, strengthen interaction between academics and practicing managers, just like Scheer in the old days in his department. Make recommendation to business and management community to highlight the impact of faculty research and identify and disseminate information on best practices. However, business schools don't change. We also had the Lund Declaration. Lund is just southern Sweden, just across the water from where I'm sitting. And this is basically saying that Europe must speed up solutions to tackle grand challenges through research, alignment, impact. And then it goes on to specify how it was. But business schools ignore the plea because we're measured on something else. Or we have the UN sustainability goals. I'm sure you all come across the 17 goals. I'm sure that in part of your life, you are respecting or trying to enhance the attainment of these goals by eating better or whatever. But by and large, researchers don't work consciously to solve these problems. We always, or almost always, start in, is there a possibility of writing a good article? And then we may develop the arguments afterwards for why it is that it, or how it is that it may support these sustainability goals. So obviously there's a lot of dissatisfaction in different kind of governmental bodies or societal institutions. And I mentioned some of them here. The most important is the first one, the REF, the Research Excellence Framework, which was done in 2014 and is going to be repeated this year. But there's also, as you see, the other ones here, EU Commission, the US National Science Foundation. And actually the bottom one, Research Fish, is an initiative by industry, which is gaining ground, and they're collecting data on social media. But let me just say a little bit about REF. The REF is that now done so that each university that like to get research funds or call themselves a research university, they have to submit an account or description of themselves. And 60% of the assessment of Surrey or Oxford University or Norwich is done on scientific peer-reviewed journal articles, 60%. And they have 34 panels with 80,000 academics involved in the assessment. So each university will submit these 19 researchers. These are their top papers. And then we'll have these 34 panels with 80,000 academics assessing it. But we also had 25% of the assessment is based on societal impact. And for every 15, 25 researchers you're saying these are academics submitted for assessment, there has to be a case. And that's a 3 to 5 page document. This weight of this impact has gone up from 20 in 14 to 25% now. So it's slightly better. However, the problem with this one is that if you have 17 researchers, you only have to submit one case. So you obviously take the one which is mostly practice-oriented, or the one where you can really document something. And the other 16 of the 17, you don't have to account for. So in my opinion, this does not satisfy a proper assessment of the impact. Finally, to add up to 100, they have 15% on research environment. That is the process that university has established to make sure that they have proper research. But the cost of this exceeds 250 million pounds. Some say even 1.4 billion pounds, which is a third of the total spending on research in UK in 1 year.
So the cost for this evaluation monster, basically.
It is monstrous. If we take the figure 1.4 billion, a third of the total cost in 1 year, they use that to assess the research for 7 years. But I mean, it in my opinion, does not satisfy. I had several talks with Diamond Hill, who is the strategic director of the program, and he said he agreed with my proposal and my critique, but they couldn't change anything for 21. So let's see what happens in 28. All of these initiatives, the REF, including the other ones, are extremely costly. They rely exclusively or almost exclusively on scientific peer-reviewed papers. So obviously, if they rely on that, that's what we need to produce. But none of them question the basic problem that researchers are measured on these articles, whether they contribute to the attainment of the UN sustainability goals or the Lund Declaration goals or anything else. And they also have some objective measures, which means that they don't involve us, they don't ask us. None of them have self-assessment included, and that's what I would argue, basically. But if I compare them, and here I have each line here, traditionally we would ask universities to think, teach, and act. Traditional obligation. In Jampi, they say indirect, how we indirectly impact something, direct interaction. We go out and talk at conferences or talk at media, or some kind of financial transaction that is, if industry pays us, then they probably like it. The AACSB practice, as I mentioned in the report from 2008, they said practice innovation, practice engagement, and practice impact. If you go to BASF, practice some innovation with them, practice engagement, practice impact, BASF will benefit. Or if it doesn't work, then at least you will learn something and you'll be better to do it next time when you're talking to Volkswagen. Dubali, who's president of a university in UK, he said, we should really look at informing, consulting, and collaborating as these three here. And that's what he would like to measure. what I'm suggesting is the bottom one, that we look at whether people are publishing something industry can read. Is it picked up by industry? Do we engage as researchers in networks, public advocation, consulting? Do we collaborate with them, or do we get research money? And that's what I'll elaborate on next 3 minutes. So the V index, as I come up with V for value, is a single value expressing the extent to which research of an individual, could also be unit or department, university, is contributing value, and is a self-assessment tool to be used once every year as part of faculty development talks. I don't know in Hagen University what you have, but certainly here at CBS, we have a development talk where each researcher will talk to her boss about the research. And this is to be used in such a way that individual assessment can be aggregated if we do that. So basically, value is created if it's relevant on the one hand, and on the other hand, the effect, if it's not just ignored, but actually it is influencing society and organization. The relevance of research, I think the ref has a lovely or relevant and excellent classification. Say research can benefit to economic growth, to health and welfare, public policy, culture, art, entertainment, whatever, and the quality of life. And I suggest that almost all important goals can fit into these 5. So on one hand, we expect the research to be relevant, and the other one is it just something I know myself or somebody out there? And the effect, as I say here, as I mentioned before, is the researcher taking the effort, besides the journal articles, to write some of these practitioner-oriented papers. You can write white papers, you can write articles in trade journals, or you can give public presentations, pump 1, non-academic media, exhibitions, etc. There was a conference here of 1,500 researchers 2 years ago on AI, and it was a world congress. I was the only researcher, Danish researcher there. Is AI not important? Nobody went. Well, I went. Secondly, is it being picked up by relevant stakeholders? If you're developing some kind of forecasting tool, or you're developing some kind of strategy or something, then is it being picked up? You can be a member of professional networks. Personally, I'm a member of 4 networks of practitioners, different types. Are you taking part in public meetings, panels, user groups? And are you offering some advice? Because if you're part of, say, German Computer Society or similar, what it's called, of course, you will talk to practitioners. You learn from them, and they will say to you, well, do you know, I have this problem back in Hamburg. And then we get into the more intense interaction, you could say, when we do engage scholarship, action research, collaboration, or consulting. Clearly, if a company is paying you to go in or to have you there, they expect something. And then obviously, if you get money from them, it's a good indication that they like it. So this is a very full slide, of course, but it's actually the full assessment slide. So there's nothing more. It's just this one here. If you see on the the rows, we have the 5 again. Are you disseminating to practitioners? Is it being picked up? Are you offering research-based advice? Government to company to whatever? Are you working in partnership? That's the action research, engage scholarship. And finally, where you obtain the funds. And then we have the 5 dimensions where it goes from 1, which is purely academic research, which of course we should do also, but then all the way to if you say 5, is it a major contribution to solving societal challenges like energy crisis or COVID-19 or unemployment or whatever? And the idea is, the process that I propose is that if Till is working here, he would fill out this form, and that would take him probably 10 minutes. He would say, well, I think I should be here, 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 across in each line. And then Till would go to his boss and head of department or head of faculty or whatever, and discuss where is it that I should be. And I suggest that the discussion of this is much more important than is it 2 or 3. The discussion that you should not just, in quote, do column 1. You should actually try to enhance and give something back to society. Because I believe that if the cashier in the supermarket in Kaufhof knew that part of her taxes were used to fund us, and if she knew what we were doing, she would not be happy. She would not be happy. So the process is, as just what I mentioned here, that you do your own assessment. In 2, you discuss it with your superior. You can aggregate it. And if you want it, you could also aggregate across the whole society, really, just like the one with the ref. So conclusion is that the scientific published research in general and IS research in particular has too little or even no societal value. A lot of it, huge amount. Too much research is done exclusively for academic credits, publishing, citation, promotion. And the current KPI, foster instrumental behavior, is not fostering instrumental behavior that will increase innovation and societal value. It is dysfunctional. So instead, we should measure academics on, I suggest, 3 KPI. The number of articles, I'll still keep that in because that's not irrelevant, of course. So extent to which is academically cited, which is the H index, similar things. And then the extent to which is contributing to solving societal values like we do, and I call that the V index. And just to mention it, the costs are trivial. It's already done in the annual talk, where I want to put societal relevance on the agenda for that talk. Thank you for keeping awake and listening.
Thank you, Niels Bjørn, and thank you for this really inspiring and also impactful presentation, for sharing your views. I think the points you're making here are a wake-up call for some of those who are in the positions to change the systems and on how we evaluate ourselves and or to at least have influence in that. In this group here, we have a number of junior researchers here, so it's probably a first insight into a bigger issue here regarding the relevance in our field, which is information systems research. And so let me start with saying that you drastically described the problem. I mean, there's predatory publishing, right? These number games in some places. You mentioned these authors that produce several thousands of publications, and you wonder how it works. I think nobody would deny that relevance is important, and I think it's also clear that is not what we strive for, these pure number games. And you mentioned all of the solutions that are on the way. So you mentioned the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I can see that at some schools, at least, these are being picked up. I mean, at Copenhagen Business Schools, they're becoming more relevant. The new university strategy is the one of a transformative university. So I think some schools are more shifting into that direction. So maybe it's a good sign that actually your constant wake-up calls and your constant lobbying for this issue have had effect together with the voices of others. You mentioned the ref in the UK. So maybe let's not look back so much on what is the issue, but I mean everybody would agree that we want to be more relevant, we want to be there in society and have an impact. So the question is, how can we ensure that, right? So looking forward, you propose this V index, which is obviously very interesting. Now, if you showed this to more colleagues in the community, I would assume that many people would ask, well, Niels Bjørn, are we not creating yet another monster here? I mean, you mentioned the cost for the ref evaluation framework. So if now everybody, I mean, we have these junior researchers here in the audience. So right, we ask them to publish, to obtain their doctoral degrees, to teach, to be present on social media and whatnot. And now we also want them to be relevant for society. So aren't we putting yet another burden on our shoulders? Aren't we yet creating yet another monster? Then what would you respond to these colleagues?
As you know, from your 5 years here or something, probably around that.
7, yeah.
My colleagues were not enthusiastic. They didn't sort of jump up and yes, let's get. And I basically think that researchers don't want anything else to mingle. They want to go on doing what they're used to, what they're good at. And if we take Anne-Catherine, who's sitting here and smiling, she has to do a PhD. You may be a PhD already, but if you're not, then for your PhD, you must have 4 articles, 5 articles. They must be on the way to peer-reviewed journals. So maybe you don't have time really to talk to industry because that may take time. So you get your PhD, but then you would like to get your assistant prof, and then you get associate prof, and then you get full prof. And all of this requires, if it only requires scientific journal articles, then after 20, 25 years, you get the position like Till, and you become full professor. And then it's time to think of relevance. But I mean, if you haven't thought about that for 25 years, what's the probability that you'll be really good at it? And therefore, I didn't put the last one on here on my conclusion. I think at least we have to make sure that our research is relevant. We have to make sure that we are concerned with something in practice. I mean, IS is an applied research. I'm not denying there's certain theoretical, but the main bulk, I mean, the 80, 90% is applied. And we should make sure that what we're doing is eminently relevant to somebody. We should not start saying, well, I must have these 4 articles in ISR, which, by the way, is relatively unreadable and uninteresting. Doesn't mean I don't have a paper coming there, hopefully sometime next year. It's been in the making since 2010, and we probably spent a couple of million on it, but it will come. It will come. We are in the 3rd review now. But I mean, there's such a waste of good energy, such a waste of talent. So Anne-Catherine or Jennifer or Fabian, whoever, you all have to make sure that wherever you're doing in research, I mean, of course, you need to have the top publications, but try and make sure that you're doing something that you know the students afterwards would be interested in reading, students would be interested in hearing about. And that points in my opinion, towards case studies rather than, say, big surveys. A big survey is good. It can give a snapshot, and then we know that 60% say this and 30% say this, and 10 don't know. But so what? We don't know why they say it. We don't know what the reasons, the underlying reasons underneath. And there I believe that case studies where you get in underneath, where you get an understanding, that also opens up the insight. And then you say, well, it's not so easy to get case study published as a big survey. No, it isn't. And as my good colleague Ben Bassat said, well, I mean, they should learn it at some, no, that was Gordon Davies, another good friend of mine who's now very retired. He said, well, at least the students should know how to crank these statistics at it once and for all. And maybe you should, but I'll just say, if it doesn't help us, if it doesn't help society, then let's not worry too much about that. So whatever you do, make sure your research is relevant. And hopefully in that way, you will be attractive too, and be contacted by industry, and they ask you to come and give presentations and work with you and so. So that's what you have to do.
Thank you. And personally, I believe that relevance is not a matter of the research method. So I'm, as you know, I'm very convinced that there can also be very relevant survey research, and that's also a different project of mine. But let's focus on your point. So let me ask one more question before I open the floor for questions. You argued relatively strongly for the idea of having industry-funded research, so to have stakeholders in the industry that will be interested in your results. And I totally see, and I also totally applaud to the project that you showcased together with Maersk, with IBM, where this worked out for you along your career very well, and nobody would doubt that this has been highly impactful. However, some colleagues might be also pointing to the downsides of this, or might view this more critically. You know better than I that right now in Denmark there's a big discussion about the independence of research and the question to which extent researchers might be influenced by the interests of industry stakeholders. You know, at German university, they always hold up the freedom of research. So how do you view that tension, and how does that go together with your idea of the V-index?
There are two ways of funding research, two main ways. One is taxpayer money, and the other is student tuition. In our country, Germany, Denmark, we are in the fortunate situation that we get money from the taxpayer and not from students, dominantly, while in the US, especially, they get it from the students. And students in the US are funding a lot of this research. It is a transfer of money from student tuition into research. But frankly, I don't think why students, yes, and taxpayers would like the kind of thing we do. And I think if they really knew what we were doing, they would be much more critical. You're right that we should not have industry decide what we do. But when I say industry, I don't mean the Confederation of Industries. It could be anybody. It could be trade unions, it could be NGOs, it could be Red Cross. I'm just saying there should be somebody out there, for crying out loud. Somebody out there must ask for the kind of research we do. Otherwise, I think it's exercise in futility. And the son of Niels Bjørn-Andersen, he got the Nobel Prize in physics some 20 years ago. And then a journalist asked him, what can this be used for? And then he looked the journalist in the eye and said, I don't think my research is to be used the next 50 years. And I don't think that's okay. I mean, I know that part of Einstein's theory from 1920 was only recently proven, but I mean, how many of us would like to be measured against Einstein? I mean, come on. If you do, then fine, then go on. I think the rest of us are mortals. We should do something that students appreciate, that we can go to industry and give a talk, that consulting companies will be demanding, And I don't see why not. And I'm not taking it out of the hands of academics, but I just like them to discuss, how can we do something with this? How can we make sure or hope that this is going to be relevant for somebody?
Thank you. And with this, I'd like to open the floor for questions from the audience.
First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. I would be interested in if you would give us any advice in balancing these existing measures that help you in your career, but still focusing on societal value.
A good colleague of mine, I'll not mention his name, he said that he would ask new PhD students to read, and that's an American system where you have a bachelor and then you have a 4-year PhD program, 2 years with courses and 2 years of writing. And he would say, I would ask my PhD student to read these 154 journal articles and then try to formulate her strategy. And then I asked him, said, how do you know that after reading 154 articles that you can be innovative? You can copy what others have done. And maybe there are certain things of copying we should do, like typing and mathematics and physics and whatever, because these are well-known tools. But innovation doesn't come from reading 154 articles. I don't say we shouldn't read them. I'm just saying that let's start by saying, where is there a problem which deserves my attention? I had a PhD student, bright, intelligent, and I said, well, she asked me about what should she do research on. And I mean, thinking about the regime in Iran and political problems, etc., I suggested to her, why don't you, water must be a problem in Iran. I know it's a problem. And half of the water you drill out is probably wasted on the way to the consumer. So why don't you develop some kind of IS research? We can detect the waste, can plan it better, can develop tools, and et cetera, et cetera. And she was very enthusiastic. Then she went back and she was told that she should not, by her supervisor, she should not concern with something like that. She should sort of study big data in general without having any specific reference. And I mean, if she's really successful, she might write herself into this direct development of AI. But I don't think it will help Iran. I'm not sure. A lot of people will help Iran, but that's not different kettle of fish. But in a way, I think it's a waste of good researchers. I mean, her comparative advantage compared to students coming out of an MIT or other schools is very low. And there's very little chance she will succeed, and also very little chance that Iran will excel, will prosper. And they really need it. I mean, not that I agree with the Mullah regime, but at least as an individual, I think you should try and think of something which is relevant. And you can ask anybody, from an NGO to a hospital to a governmental agency to companies. I mean, all of these will report on problems. And of course, you use your supervisor, your professor, to somehow hone in. I mean, is this something I can publish later? Because of course you must publish. But I think it would be so much nicer. And I'm sure that it would be so much easier if you are in a position you can say to somebody, well, this is the kind of research I do. It will help create a better treatment of COVID-19, or I will have less people will have suffer malpractice in the hospitals or whatever.
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much.
My question is, what would you suggest me or us if we want to change system structures, for example, in science or in business or in government, for example?
I basically repeat this kind of quest. And I think in our journals, we should always ask. In the past, 20 years ago, the MISQ would have practitioners read our articles, CIOs, and then they would somehow digest what they got out of it. We had to stop that because basically the articles are unreadable for more ordinary mortals. And I think that is a pity. I was giving a course to a consulting company, a fairly large consulting company at home with a couple of thousand people. And I gave them an MISQ article of crowdsourcing, which I was quite proud of, and it's been cited 1,000 times. Very high citation, but I actually gave it to the whole class of 19, but only one came back and said he read it and said it was a very hard read. Because, well, it is.
Yeah.
Because we got this insight on crowdsourcing in the Lego company. And the basic insight could be said in 2 pages. But of course, the paper in MISQ is 40 pages. So basically, I think you need to make sure that you write this MISQ article because you must do that. But then you should also take the effort to write a case. And I think case teaching is so much better than traditional teaching. So I strongly encourage you to get a course on case teaching from Harvard or Western Ontario, Ivy or whatever, or at your local school, and try to get these cases because students will love it. And it'll make so much more sense to them rather than having a 2x2. If you cannot identify good cases, something they can associate with, then they cannot form in their mind what's happening and they cannot learn. I mean, they can regurgitate what the professor said. They can repeat the 2x2, but they cannot apply it. And what have we achieved then? Then we are developing, as a colleague of mine said, academics are now becoming or having lexical diarrhea. Lexical diarrhea. They just spit out all these concepts. But if you cannot identify with it, then, I mean, the Harvard Business Review and the Sloan Management Review, to me, are so much more, or the MISQ Executive is so much more relevant than the traditional journals like the ISR. To mention one that I think has a challenge. So that's basically what I think we should do, and I don't think any of you can change it on your own. Of course you can't, but I think that we can all do our little part, and if we become known in the environment as, well, Jennifer is really the one that can, she can come out and explain it to us, or Jennifer's students are really good. It's not good if industry says, well, the students from Hagen are okay. The only problem is they haven't learned anything we can use, and we have to retrain them once they get out to us. I think that's a pity. That's a waste of resources, waste of energy, waste of our intellect. So I think we need to do something.
Yes, thank you, Niels. And I also just quickly wanted to underline your plea for case study research or case studies also for teaching. I've had the pleasure to contribute one case study to one of the books that you edited, and I keep using that case as part of my teaching, and it's been highly valuable and appreciated by the students. Let's have a brief final question. I think Jennifer raised her hand. Jenny, please.
I was just wondering, do you think the research community is ready, or what do you think, when will it be ready? Because if I only think about, okay, I need to write a paper, or I want to write a paper that is relevant for practice, I would maybe come up with a paper like the avocado case, and then it gets rejected because the research community might not be ready yet. So what do you think?
We obviously all need that. And we have double standards. There's something you tell to your mother, and there's something you tell to your friends. The paper about the avocados, I talked about it at a conference. There was the editor-in-chief of the Information Systems Journal. He came up to me afterwards, said, could he have the paper? I said, sure, I'll just change a few things. I sent it to him Friday at 5:22, my time, 22 minutes past 5 in the afternoon. So he just got it in Hong Kong. And he said, it's now 11:30, so I'll read it tomorrow morning. And when I got up the next morning at 7, I opened my mailbox and said, I take it as it is. So I said, oh, you don't want to send out to reviewers? No, he said, I can do it, but it's next on paper. So I'll just publish it. So there are still some roncadors, some old dinosaurs, and I believe they will die out. And I believe that some of the other ones are really good. And so you need to find places, outlets. JIT has a case series, which I also think is very nice. And we need to change it bit by bit, because we cannot make the whole research community change. And obviously there's difference between applied sciences like ours or medical science, and if you take nuclear physics, which of course is different. It was amazing, lovely to have you. So thanks a lot for listening in.
Thank you, Niels, and I hope that maybe this brown bag and your talk can be a small step in this change of the system bit by bit. Thank you very much for being here with us today and taking the time. Thanks very much.